Thank you very much to Mam Judy Kamini for joining us here on the front of the stage and, of course, giving us some insight into our first panel discussion that we're going to participate in. You're more than welcome to have a seat to my right-hand side here on stage. I do want to alert you, though, that, of course, as the program continues to develop, we are looking to get some of your insight in terms of feedback on social media as well as on the app. An acknowledgement that we do have another guest who unfortunately has not been able to join us due to travel delays. Ms. Toyin Sani, who's the Group CEO of Emerging Africa Capital, will unfortunately not be joining this panel discussion due to delays in terms of logistics. But whilst we miss her insight, we'll be sure to catch up with her as soon as she does arrive. However, into the conversation of the day. Mam Judy, thank you so much, firstly, for your time today as we look to peel back at the various layers at understanding how best it is that we need to encourage the participation of women within the C-suite executive. And for many years, it's been documented that it's all in terms of strategy, in terms of driving inclusion and creating a culture that is more inclusive and provides the success of women to be prioritized. But let's get your perspective. You've had decades on end to observe this in the various spheres that you've played in. Are we making progress in terms of this development in South Africa and across the continent?
Thank you. Sanbonan, good morning. Thanks very much for having me. It's actually been very interesting the past 20 to 30 years in terms of how 4IR has changed the way things happen, and in my view, for the benefit of women, and I'll explain why. We are more connected. The C-suite has changed not only because of the new positions, even the old positions have changed in terms of your bean counter, your CFO. Technical expertise is not the only thing now. Some of the technical expertise actually can be done by a computer, you know. So what you need, you actually need to develop more skills, breadth and depth in skills, understanding how that bean counting and regulatory environment impacts on the strategy of the business. You've had quite a few companies that now have a diversity executive. But initially, you would have a diversity executive as a tick in the box.
Yes.
But over time, people have realized that we actually need to have an inclusive culture. And the inclusive culture has to be driven by the CEO. So if the diversity executive is to be taken seriously and have impact in the business, she has to be linked to the CEO. She has to report to the CEO. So there's been a lot of change in terms of that. But even besides that, you actually, in this country, as most of the people from here know, with the BE codes, with the transformation of the economy or the intention thereof, you actually had these pillars that had to be addressed, like you actually have to have women, you have to have people of ethnic diversity.
And more from a regulatory point of view.
More from a regulatory point of view. And it was a nuisance thing as far as the CEOs were concerned. But then people realized that actually we're losing out because unless these people are actually embraced by the culture of the organization rather than assimilated, we're losing out. It's our money. They leave, they are frustrated. So we've actually seen those that are progressive and those that tend to do well, creating an inclusive culture within the organization. Something that has happened in the past 5 years maybe, which I think has to be embraced and encouraged, the Gender Equality Index,
yes.
the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index, started in 2016, focusing on the financial institutions, and then it was rolled out in 2018 to all the industries. Unfortunately, I don't think Africa is covered yet. I haven't seen companies that are from the continent. But why that is important is because there is actually an increase in the take-up where you measure a company in transparency in terms of what they are doing for gender equality in the organization, whether it's gender pay, whether it's the number of managers in the C-suite that are women. Starting in 2018 with only 104 companies from 24 countries. In 2020, you actually have 320 companies and in 42 countries. So it's actually, the take-up is increasing. The thing that I find quite interesting, Gugu, is what I'll say is perceived to be soft skills.
Yes.
And why I say the changes favor women, it's because when it comes to connectedness, we get that. When it comes to societal impact, which is now actually, companies are looking at societal impact, not because of altruistic reasons, in my view, but you find that if you are in touch with the societal impact that your organization is actually delivering to the communities that you serve, it generates new revenue streams. It attracts millennials.
Yes.
Which are, millennials want to say, they actually say, what's my purpose? What am I doing this for? Because it's bigger than just money.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, right? Because it does speak to, as you say, this emotional intelligence and EQ, which is often so undermined and seen as the airy, fluffy, soft skills that people need. But in terms of connecting with human beings, that's actually the hard part of the job, right? And it actually, as you say, calls to being aligned with strategy, driving increased revenue and profitability for chief executives. But how do you also see this translating into new roles that are coming up? Not just a female being appointed as to head of HR, but rather a chief inclusivity officer, chief diversity officer. I understand in global context there are even chief happiness officers where the happiness of your employees is something that is measured as an index translating into productivity.
Okay. It's interesting you say that. I had a conversation with a former Nike executive recently, and in his CV he had written that he led a black employees network. And I wanted to find out what was this about. Talking again to inclusive culture, he says when he actually started, the person that was the diversity executive didn't report to the CEO.
Oh.
It was just ticking the box, we'll do this, and not much happened. So they employed a new person. It happened to be a woman, coincidentally maybe. And she said, I'm only taking this position if I report to the CEO. And one, it gives you clout, and two, the agenda is driven from the office that matters. So I think there's more to it than just new positions. It's how much value is put into those positions, but also the people that are holding those positions. So I'm actually very excited about the importance of EQ and management of people.
Yeah.
You know, because that's what we're good at.
I'm glad you mentioned that because later we will be expanding on conversations and themes that delve around AI, artificial intelligence, and of course ensuring that we're prepared for the fourth industrial revolution. And it almost seems as though we need to juxtaposition the emotional intelligence element, which we know robots are not capable of doing, and of course being prepared at the same time for this industrial revolution. From a chief executive point of view, how is it that we are aligning strategies from a top-down approach and bottom-up approach to ensure that there's alignment, that the human touch and element is still there, yet the speed, accessibility, and productivity of robotics is also aligned?
It's actually, it goes back again to lifelong learning for the organization, lifelong learning for all the executives, and right through the organization, because we need to develop our people. We need to, one of the things that I love talking about is that if you don't recognize people for who they are without trying to change them, you lose their innovativeness. Because you put them in this box and they say, they do as they are told. But if we are serious about getting the best out of our employees, over and above developing them is allowing them the space to try and fail, which is what organizations that do well do.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I'm sure in this room filled of beautiful, ambitious women, there are many of you who have ambitions of reaching the C-suite. So we've touched on the C-suite, an executive role in terms of how they're deploying the strategy, but how many of the in the room actually have ambitions of being part of the C-suite and are actually on your way to growing up there? By show of hands? I'd expect a few more, but maybe you're working in different spaces. And
we
I
can
ask
do
this
better than
for your
that.
benefits, that we can also understand, Dr. Dlamini, as to how it is that somebody who still has ambitions of climbing this ladder and entering the C-suite can actually empower themselves.
Exactly.
Make sure that they prioritize access with the CEO
Exactly.
And physically manage to transform the organization they want to participate in.
I'm happy you raised that because there are a few things that I've learned, having mentored people who actually are ambitious to reach the C-suite. One of them, which I know you understand very well, is self-investment, investing in yourself.
Yes.
That's one, through education. The other one is getting a mentor, whether it's within the organization or outside the organization. And one of the things that's quite difficult for women yet, I mean for now, is getting a sponsor. Because a sponsor is very different from a mentor. A sponsor speaks for you when you are not in the room. And you want a sponsor who is in the C-suite, who will actually tell your story when you're not in the room. But I think the other thing that beats everything else is the attitude. People, especially young people who've just qualified, I come into the organization with my MBA, I will do this but not that. And somehow, in the connectedness and the importance of people that I want to work with that person. Why? Because her attitude is amazing. She actually doesn't look down upon certain things. Just do as much as you can. Be helpful, be a team player. All those skills are so important because technical skills, I keep on repeating, are great. Are great. We say to young people, you must go to the STEM, do the STEM subjects, especially for girls, but that's not all. People skills, attitude, and just being helpful, working as a team.
I'd like to sidestep because I know that you're a mother and you're sitting next to us speaking as an executive leader within the corporate space. But in this room full of daughters, and I say that respectively, daughters of all ages, how then would you encourage us to continue with our mandate in terms of affirmativeness, but balancing the EQ dynamics in the workplace and not feeling as though you're compromising on your own self-development and personal growth?
I always say, Gugu, that nothing is worth selling your spirit, one, and changing who you are. And I think I learned that when I actually joined the boards that, you know what, I can wear my pink outfits, dangling earrings, and still be heard. Because it's not about, actually you have to be presentable, own your femininity, which is important. But I think the most important thing is to be well prepared and own your space, own your voice, and be deliberate. Because I find my experience has been a deliberate intimidation of the female voice.
I think you need to say that again so that we hear it very clearly.
A deliberate intimidation of the female voice, especially for the younger woman.
Level 3. There we go.
Because they know it's foreign territory and there isn't enough of you around the room. As you know, they strengthen numbers, so the critical impact is not felt if it's just one woman or two. So you'll say something, you've heard this so many times, and it will be pretended like you didn't say anything. You need to be firm, politely, gently but firm, to actually raise your hand and say, that's the point I've just said, when the accolade is given to a male. So I think for you to be able to do that, you need to know your story and be prepared. Sometimes you'll say something stupid. It's okay. Men do it all the time. Honestly, and we prepare so hard and we are so conscious of self. And men come and just wing it. And you look at him and you say, what rubbish have you just said? But obviously, you can't say that. So I think we need to be more confident and humble at the same time. As you know, I spoke to quite a few leaders over the past 4 years.
Yes.
About 20 women, 20 men. And one of the things that is true but painful is that unfortunately, as women, you still have to work so much harder just to be recognized and take so much longer just to get that promotion. But the good thing is it's possible and you have what it takes to do it. And as more women accelerate to ascend to the C-suite and CEO position, it will change. But I actually want to say this because maybe it's because of age that I'm getting impatient, that it's taking forever. For the past 20 years, we've been talking about 3.5%, 5%
Yes.
of
Female
CEOs that
representation.
exactly. I see with the Fortune 500, there's excitement that, oh, it's 33, but that's less than 7%, but it's the highest that it's been. And maybe there is something to be learned from the activism that we've observed. Weinstein would be in jail today if it was not for Me Too movement, right?
Yes.
And coming back to this country, the blackout last year, what did it do? We now have allocation of 1.8 billion rand. Last week, they actually reallocated places of safety for women, and it's going to increase from 54 to 102. Why? Because of activism. So it's all well and good to say, well, we actually have the Gender Equality Index. We actually believe that we need more women because if you increase gender by 1%, the revenue increases by 3%.
Yes.
You increase diversity in terms of ethnicity, revenue increases by 15%. But it's taking forever. So I truly believe as a continent, we need to be activists. Just conferences without saying, in 2020, this is where we are. In 2030, this is where we should be. What should we do as a country, as a continent, to push for this change? Because power is difficult to get, to actually let go. People know that women are good at what they do and they have what it takes to run these countries and run these economies.
Exactly.
But we don't want to do that because the stereotype has to remain that women are less. So unless women become activists for their own emancipation, it's not going to happen.
Indeed.
Just one thing that I would like to say.
Go ahead, briefly,
right?
ma'am.
For us as South Africans, we were the last to be freed from our colonizer. We didn't do it on our own. We actually had a lot of countries that are sitting in this room that helped us to achieve it within the continent, but also outside.
Sure.
So that activism within the continent, we need to go back to it because that emancipation, we're still lacking when it comes to women. And I want to say it again, it won't happen on its own.
Indeed. It will not happen on its own. We need increased collaborative efforts to drive the activism in order to manage to see the change that we want to see take place within South Africa's corporate space. So with that said, thank you so much, Dr. Judy Dlamini, for giving us some nuggets and insight. And I think to the audience in the room, again, your work ethic does certainly speak for itself, ensuring that you have the necessary mentorship and sponsorship, and of course, collaborating with your peers across the continent in order for a joint vision to come to light. Thank you so much for setting the agenda today.
Thank you,
Ladies and gentlemen, level 3 applause, Dr. Judy Dlamini.
Thank you so much. Can I go to you?
Yes, ma'am.